Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Charles Patterson, but everyone calls me Chuck. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 18 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia woods could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, even the occasional moonshiner. But I never believed in flying monsters or creatures that could see the future. That was just old mountain talk, stories to scare kids around campfires. I should have listened to those stories. It was November 1967 and winter was coming early. The Ohio River fog rolled thick through the valleys, mixing with smoke from the chemical plants downstream. Everything smelled like rust and old coal. I lived in Point Pleasant with my wife Sarah and our 2 kids, but most of my work kept me in the TNT area. 8,000 acres of abandoned World War II bunkers scattered through the forest like concrete tumors. The place gave most people the creeps. During the war, they made explosives there. Tons of TNT stored in hundreds of concrete bunkers, connected by a maze of old military roads that were slowly disappearing under 20 years of forest growth. The government said they'd cleaned it all out, but we still found unexploded shells sometimes. Posted signs everywhere warning people to stay away. That's why I didn't take the first reports seriously. "Ranger Patterson," the voice on my radio crackled that cold Tuesday morning. "We got another one of them bird reports from the TNT area. Folks saying they saw something with red eyes, big as a small plane." I sighed and reached for my coffee. "How big we talking, dispatch?" 10-foot wingspan, according to the witness. Says it was perched on one of them old bunkers like it owned the place. I'd been a civil engineer before I became a ranger, and I knew birds. The biggest wingspan in North America belonged to the California condor, and those barely hit 9 feet. Plus, they were all out west. Probably just saw a crane or a large hawk. Fog plays tricks on your eyes. But the reports kept coming. Different people, different days, all describing the same impossible thing. A giant bird-like creature with glowing red eyes that watched them from the bunkers. Some said it was gray, others said brown. All of them said those red eyes burned like headlights in the dark. The breaking point came when Mrs. Henderson called the sheriff's office in tears. She'd been driving past the TNT area around sunset when something huge swooped down over her car. "It followed me for 3 miles, she sobbed into the phone. "Those red eyes staring right through my windshield. My car radio went dead, and the engine kept stuttering like it was going to quit on me." Sheriff Millette called me that evening. "Chuck, I need you to take a look around out there. People are getting scared, and scared people do stupid things. Last thing we need is some fool with a shotgun wandering around those old bunkers looking for monsters." I agreed to investigate, though I figured I'd find nothing more than some teenagers playing pranks or maybe a diseased bird acting strange. I'd been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but never this wrong. The next morning, I loaded my truck with everything I might need. Powerful spotlight, camera with a telephoto lens, binoculars, my service pistol, and a transistor radio to stay in touch with dispatch. I even brought my old engineering instruments, thinking maybe I could measure something that would explain what people were seeing. The drive to the TNT area took me along the Ohio River, past the Silver Bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Ohio. The bridge was nearly 40 years old, built back in 1928, and lately I'd been noticing more rust on the suspension chains. Made a mental note to recommend another inspection soon. As I turned onto the old military access road, the forest seemed to swallow my truck. Ancient oaks and maples crowded both sides, their branches forming a tunnel overhead. The concrete, bunkers appeared through the trees like broken teeth scattered across the landscape with no apparent pattern. Weeds and small trees grew from cracks in their roofs. I parked near bunker number 7, one of the larger structures, and stepped out into the morning silence. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed muffled. That should have been my first warning. I spent the morning walking between bunkers, looking for anything unusual. Most of the concrete structures were sealed tight, metal doors rusted shut and covered with warning signs about unexploded ordnance. But as I circled bunker number 12, I found something that made me stop cold. Scratch marks. Deep gouges in the concrete about 15 feet up the wall. They looked fresh, cutting through decades of weathering and rust stains like they'd been made yesterday. I pulled out my measuring tape and found them to be over 3 inches deep in some places. No bird could do that. Hell, I wasn't sure any animal could score concrete that deep. I took photos from every angle trying to think of what could make marks like those. Maybe someone with climbing gear and a chisel. But why? My radio crackled. "Ranger Patterson, this is dispatch. You copy?" I keyed the microphone. "I'm here. Found some unusual damage to one of the bunkers. Looks like something with very large claws was here." Static filled the channel for several seconds. Then, "Copy that. We just got another report. Trucker on Route 62 says he saw your bird thing perched on the Silver Bridge about an hour ago. Says it was staring down at the traffic." I looked through the trees toward the river, where the bridge's towers were barely visible in the distance. "I'll check it out after I finish here." But as I signed off, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A sound like leather bay, being dragged across concrete, coming from above me. I looked up at the bunker roof, shading my eyes against the gray sky. Nothing there. The sound came again, closer this time, like massive wings folding against themselves. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the tree line, then the other bunker roofs visible through the forest. Still nothing. That's when I noticed my radio was making a high-pitched whining noise, even though it was turned off. I checked the battery. Full power. Tapped the case. The whining got louder. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings and watched the needle spin like a top, unable to find magnetic north. Something was very wrong here. I decided to check inside one of the bunkers. Bunker number 3 had a door that wasn't completely sealed, hanging open just enough for a man to squeeze through. I clicked on my flashlight and pushed inside. The air was thick and stale, tasting of rust and something else. Something organic and rotten. My light swept across empty concrete walls, revealing nothing but years of dust and debris. But as I moved deeper inside, I found something that shouldn't have been there. Feathers. Hundreds of them scattered across the floor like someone had butchered a giant bird. But they were wrong. Too big, too dark. And they seemed to shimmer with an oily iridescence that hurt to look at directly. I picked one up and immediately regretted it. The thing was nearly 2 feet long and felt warm, like it had just been plucked from a living animal. My radio suddenly burst to life with a voice I didn't recognize. "He sees you. He knows you're here. You should leave now before he comes back." I spun around, keying my microphone. "Who is this? Identify yourself." Only static answered. I stuffed the feather into my jacket pocket and headed for the exit, my flashlight beam dancing crazily as my hand shook. But as I reached the doorway, anything blocked out the gray sky above. A shadow passed over the bunker entrance, something huge with wings spread wide. I burst outside and looked up, but whatever it was had already moved. All I saw were the clouds, thick and low like they always were before a storm. The drive to Silver Bridge should have taken 10 minutes. It took me 20 because my truck's engine kept sputtering and my radio wouldn't stop making that damn whining noise. By the time I reached the bridge approach, 3 state police cars were already there. Trooper Steve Millette waved me over. "Chuck, glad you're here. We got a situation." He led me to his patrol car where a trucker sat in the back seat, still shaking. Big guy, probably hauled freight for 30 years, but his face was pale as milk. "Tell the ranger what you told me, Eddie." The trucker looked up at me with haunted eyes. "I was coming across the bridge from Ohio, just making my regular run. Traffic was light, maybe a dozen cars scattered across both lanes. Then I saw it." He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "This thing was sitting on top of the south tower, right where the cables attach. Looked like a man at first, just sitting there. But when I got closer, I could see it wasn't human. Had wings folded against its back and these eyes. He shuddered. Red as taillights, staring down at every car that passed under. How big? I asked. Big as a man, maybe bigger. But those wings, when they moved, he gestured helplessly, like it could wrap up a car if it wanted to. Trooper Millette and I walked to the middle of the bridge, looking up at the tower where the trucker had seen the creature. Nothing there now but rust and peeling paint. But as I studied the steel structure, I noticed something odd. Steve, look at this. I pointed to several of the suspension cables. See how some of these are more corroded than others? And the way that one's frayed near the anchor point? He squinted up at the cables. You thinking maintenance issue? Maybe. This bridge is getting old, and salt from the river air doesn't help. But something nagged at me, something I couldn't put my finger on. We should recommend a full structural inspection. As we walked back to shore, my radio crackled with dispatch. All units, we have another sighting. Creature reported at the TNT area, bunker number 7. Witness says it's there right now. I looked at Steve. Want to take a ride? 20 minutes later, we were creeping through the forest in my truck, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The witness was a teenage couple who'd been parked near the bunkers, doing what teenagers do in parked cars. They'd run to the main road and flag down a passing motorist to call for help. It was right there, the girl whispered, pointing at bunker number 7, sitting on top like it was waiting for something. When it saw our headlights, it spread its wings and just vanished. Steve and I approached the bunker with flashlights drawn. The structure looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, but something felt different. The air itself seemed charged, like just before lightning strikes. Jesus Christ, Steve breathed. He was staring at the bunker's roof. In the beam of his flashlight, I could see what had scared him. Fresh claw marks scored the concrete from one end to the other, as if something had landed hard and skidded across the surface. But these weren't like the marks I'd found that morning. These were bigger, deeper, and they formed a pattern, almost like letters. Over the next week, reports came in almost daily. The thing was getting bolder, appearing closer to town and staying visible longer. Mrs. Chen saw it perched on the water tower. 3 kids spotted it in the cemetery, sitting on top of the old Confederate monument. A couple driving home from church swore it followed their car for 2 miles along Route 35. But it was the pattern that worried me most. Every sighting was closer to the Silver Bridge. I'd started keeping a map in my office, marking each encounter with red pins. The pins formed a rough circle around Point Pleasant, with the bridge at the center. Whatever this thing was, it was focused on our town. The feather I'd found was still in my desk drawer. I'd shown it to Dr. Morrison at the State University, but he couldn't identify the species. Looks like some kind of raptor, he'd said, but I've never seen anything like it. The bone structure is all wrong. On Friday night, I got a call that changed everything. Chuck? Sarah's voice was tight with fear. You need to come home. Now. I found my family huddled in the living room. Sarah was holding our 8-year-old daughter Emma, while 12-year-old Tommy sat pressed against his mother's side. All 3 of them were staring at the front window. It was out there, Sarah whispered, on the power lines across the street, just sitting there, staring at our house. I looked outside but saw nothing. How long ago? 10 minutes, maybe less. Tommy saw it first. My son nodded, his face pale. Dad, its eyes were so red. Like when you look at a stoplight, but 100 times brighter. And it was big, bigger than a person. I spent the rest of the night patrolling the neighborhood but found nothing. No tracks, no feathers, no evidence anything had been there. But I could feel it watching us. Every shadow seemed too dark. Every movement in my peripheral vision might be wings. The next morning, I drove back to the TNT area with Steve and a military explosives expert named Captain Riley. If this thing was making its nest in the old bunkers, we needed to know which ones were safe to enter. Captain Riley was a thin, nervous man who kept checking his radiation detector every few minutes. Most of these bunkers are clean, he said, but a few still show elevated readings. Could be leftover chemicals, could be unexploded ordnance. Either way, I wouldn't recommend going inside. But bunker number 7 was clean, and the door was standing wide open. I sealed that yesterday, Steve, he said. Chained it shut myself. The chains lay on the ground, snapped like they were made of paper. The massive steel door, which should have taken 3 men to move, hung askew on its hinges. We entered with flashlights and guns drawn. The concrete walls were covered with the same claw marks I'd been finding everywhere, but these formed definite patterns. Symbols, maybe, or some kind of writing. They covered every surface, scratched deep into concrete that was harder than most rock. "Look at this," Captain Riley called from the far corner. He was standing over what looked like a nest made from twisted metal and debris. Pieces of cars, chunks of bridge cable, strips of aluminum siding, all woven together in a rough circle about 8 feet across. In the center lay more of those impossible feathers, along with bones that might have been from deer or dogs. It was hard to tell. They'd been cracked open and the marrow sucked out. "Whatever's living here," Riley said quietly, "it's not any kind of bird I know about." That's when we heard it. A sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, coming from somewhere above us. We all looked up at the concrete ceiling, our flashlight beams dancing across the scratched surface. The sound came again, closer this time, and with it, a voice, if you could call it that. More like words formed from the scraping of metal on stone, barely recognizable as language. "Go. Away. Now." Steve had his service weapon out, scanning the darkness. "Who's there? Show yourself." The temperature in the bunker dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Our breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the concrete walls. My radio started that high-pitched whining again, so loud it hurt our ears. Then the lights went out. Not just our flashlights, though those died too. Every source of light we had simply stopped working, leaving us, in absolute, to darkness. The only thing visible were 2 red points of light near the ceiling, watching us with unmistakable intelligence. "Run," I whispered. We stumbled toward where the exit should be, hands stretched out in front of us, bumping into walls and each other in panic. The red eyes followed our movement, and I could hear something massive shifting above our heads, the sound of leather wings unfolding. Somehow we found the door and burst out into gray daylight. Behind us, a roar shook the bunker, not the cry of any animal, but the sound of raw fury made audible. Metal groaned and concrete cracked as whatever was inside threw itself against the walls. We ran to our vehicles and didn't stop driving until we reached the sheriff's office in town. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red lights staring down at us. I kept checking the windows, making sure all the doors were locked, listening for the sound of wings outside. Around midnight, Emma started screaming. I found her sitting up in bed, pointing at her window. "It's out there, Daddy. It's looking at me." I rushed to the window and pulled back the curtain. Nothing there but empty sky and the streetlight across the road. But Emma kept screaming, her small hands pressed against her eyes. "It's still there. It's still looking at me." Sarah came running, and together we tried to calm our daughter. But Emma wouldn't stop shaking, wouldn't stop staring at that window with pure terror in her eyes. "What did it look like, honey?" Sarah asked gently. "Like a man with wings," Emma whispered. "But not a good man. A scary man with red eyes that could see inside my head. It showed me pictures, Mommy. Bad pictures." "What kind of pictures?" Emma looked at me with those innocent 8-year-old eyes and said the words that still haunt my dreams. "It showed me the bridge falling down. All the cars falling into the water. People screaming and drowning. And it was happy, Daddy. The scary man was happy about all the people getting hurt." I called in sick the next day and spent at Reseer, ching everything I could find about the creature people were seeing. What I found in the old records made my blood run cold. The Shawnee tribes who lived in this area before white settlement had legends about something they called the Flying Death Spirit. According to their oral traditions, it appeared before great disasters, floods, earthquakes, battles that would claim many lives. They believed it fed on human suffering, growing stronger with each tragedy it witnessed. The last recorded sighting had been in 1907, just before the mine explosion that killed 43 men in nearby Mason County. I was starting to understand what we were dealing with, and it wasn't just some unknown species of bird. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table trying to make sense of everything I'd learned, my radio crackled to life. "Ranger Patterson, we need you at the Silver Bridge immediately. We have a situation." The Silver Bridge was closed to traffic when I arrived, police cars blocking both approaches with their red and blue lights flashing. Captain Riley was there with a team of military engineers, all of them looking grim as they studied the bridge's structure through binoculars. "Chuck, thank God you're here," Trooper Mallette called out. "We got problems." He led me to where the engineers had set up their equipment. Captain Riley looked up from a clipboard full of readings and measurements, his face pale in the flashing police lights. "The bridge is failing," he said simply. "These suspension cables are under much more stress than they should be. Some of the anchor points are showing microfractures, and the main support structure has stress cracks we missed in the last inspection." I felt my stomach drop. "How bad?" "Bad enough that we've closed the bridge until we can do emergency repairs. But here's the strange part. According to these readings, the deterioration has accelerated dramatically in just the past few weeks. It's like something has been systematically weakening the structure." I thought about Emma's vision, about the creature showing her the bridge collapse. "How long do we have?" Riley consulted his instruments. "Hard to say. Could be months, could be days. But if traffic keeps using this bridge at normal levels," he shrugged, "I wouldn't want to be the one to predict when it comes down." That's when I saw it. Perched on the south tower, exactly where the trucker had described seeing it weeks ago, was the creature. Even at a distance of 200 yards, those red eyes were clearly visible, burning like signal flares in the darkness. It sat motionless, watching the engineers work, watching the police cars, watching us, watching me. "There," I pointed, "on the tower." Everyone turned to look, but as soon as our flashlights hit it, the thing spread its wings, wings that seemed to span the entire width of the bridge, and dropped from sight behind the tower structure. "Did you see the size of that thing?" one of the engineers whispered. But I was already moving, heading for my truck. Something clicked in my mind, a terrible understanding of what was happening. The creature wasn't just predicting the bridge collapse, it was causing it. All those claw marks on the concrete bunkers, the systematic pattern of its appearances, the way it had focused on this area. It was preparing, weakening the structure slowly and deliberately. And now it was almost ready to feed. I drove to the TNT area one more time, but this time I went alone and I went armed. My service pistol might not be much good against a supernatural creature, but I also brought a shotgun loaded with steel buckshot and a large flashlight that could blind anything looking at it directly. Bunker number 7 was waiting for me, its door hanging open like a mouth ready to swallow whatever stepped inside. But I didn't go in. Instead, I climbed on top of the structure and waited. It didn't take long. The sound came first, that leather-on-concrete scraping I'd eared so many times before. Then the temperature dropped and my breath began coming out in white puffs. My radio started its electronic screaming, and every piece of metal on my body began to feel charged with static electricity. It rose from behind the bunker like a piece of the night sky breaking free. The creature was even larger than I'd imagined. Nearly 7 feet tall, with wings that stretched at least 15 feet from tip to tip. Its body looked almost human, but wrong in every detail, like someone had tried to build a person from memory and gotten all the proportions slightly off. But it was the eyes that held me frozen. Not just red, but like looking into the heart of a furnace. They burned with an intelligence that was ancient and utterly alien. And when they fixed on me, I felt it rifling through my memories like pages in a book. "I know you," It spoke directly into my mind, its voice like grinding stone. You are the one who has been watching, the one who interferes. What are you? I managed to ask out loud. I am what comes before the ending, what feeds on the sorrow of those who remain. Your people built their precious bridge with metal and hope, but both corrode when touched by despair. The bridge isn't going to fall, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We've closed it. We're going to fix it. The creature's head tilted, almost like it was amused. Your repairs will not save them. I have been patient, weakening each cable, each joint, each connection that holds their hope above the dark water. When I am ready, it will fall, and many will die, and I will feast on the grief of those who love them. It spread its wings wider, and I could see the bridge towers in the distance beyond them. As I watched, something impossible happened. The creature began to show me visions, projecting images directly into my mind. I saw the silver bridge on a cold December evening, packed with rush-hour traffic heading home for the weekend. Cars backed up bumper to bumper, families with Christmas presents, workers eager to get home. I saw the exact moment when the North Tower's main cable snapped, the point where the creature's patient sabotage would finally pay off. The bridge folded like a closing book, dumping 46 vehicles and 93 people into the freezing Ohio River. Most of them would die in the first few minutes, trapped in their cars as the river filled their lungs. The survivors would spend the rest of their lives reliving those moments of terror, and their grief would feed the creature for decades to come. No, I whispered. Then louder. No. Yes. It hissed. And you will watch. You will be my witness, as you have been from the beginning. That is why I have marked you, why I let you see me when others could not. You will carry the knowledge of what is coming, and when it happens, you will remember that you could not stop it. The visions shifted, showing me my own family. Sarah and the kids driving across the bridge on December 15th, caught in the collapse, their car spinning through the air toward the dark water below. I saw Emma's face in the final moment, saw her looking for her daddy to save her. They won't be on the bridge, I said desperately. I'll make sure they stay home that day. Will you? And what of the others? What of the mother taking her children to see their grandmother? What of the young couple driving to their wedding? What of the old man who fought in your wars and earned the right to die peacefully in his bed? The creature leaned forward, and I could smell something like sulfur and rotting meat on its breath. You cannot save them all. You can barely save yourself. That's when I realized what I had to do. I pulled out my service pistol and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets passed right through the creature like it was made of smoke, striking the concrete behind it with bright sparks. It didn't even flinch, but it did laugh, a sound like metal tearing. Foolish little man. I am not flesh to be wounded or bone to be broken. I am hunger itself, older than your species, and I will endure long after your civilization has crumbled to dust. I holstered the gun and picked up the shotgun instead. Not to shoot the creature, I knew that wouldn't work, but to shoot something else. The creature was so focused on its taunting that it didn't notice what I was aiming at until too late. I put both barrels into the electrical transformer that fed power to the TNT area, and the night exploded in white fire and falling sparks. The creature shrieked, the first sound I'd heard it make with its physical voice rather than its mental one. The electromagnetic pulse from the destroyed transformer seemed to hurt it somehow, causing its form to flicker and distort like a bad television signal. I ran for my truck as the thing recovered, its roar of fury shaking the trees around us. By the time I reached the vehicle, it was airborne and coming after me, wings beating the air with hurricane force. The drive back to town was the longest 5 minutes of my life. Every few seconds, I'd see those red eyes in my rearview mirror, growing larger as the creature gained on me. Trees bent and broke as it passed overhead, and my truck's engine kept sputtering like it was going to die. But somehow, I made it to the bridge approach, where Captain Riley and his team were still working. I skidded to a stop and jumped out, shouting warnings about the creature following me. That's when it appeared over the bridge itself, hovering above the south tower with its wings spread wide. Every person there, police, engineers, civilians, stopped what they were doing and stared up at the impossible sight. "Now do you believe me?" I shouted to Captain Riley. "It's been sabotaging the bridge. We have to evacuate the whole area." But as we watched, the creature began to glow with a dark radiance that hurt to look at directly. The air around it shimmered with heat distortion, and every piece of metal on the bridge began to vibrate with harmonic resonance. The thing was trying to bring the bridge down right now, with all of us standing on it. I felt the deck plates shift under my feet as the creature's power focused on the suspension cables. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading, the disaster Emma had seen in her vision. Except it was happening weeks early, and we were all about to die. Unless... I ran to my truck and grabbed the large flashlight, the kind used for night rescue operations, with enough candle power to signal aircraft. As the creature hovered above us, pouring its malevolent energy into the failing bridge structure, I aimed the beam directly at those burning red eyes and switched it on. The effect was immediate and violent. The creature screamed and reeled back, its form flickering and wavering like smoke in a strong wind. For just a moment, it lost concentration, and the bridge stopped its ominous shaking. "Light!" I yelled to everyone around me. "It doesn't like bright light. Get every flashlight, every floodlight, everything you've got." Within minutes, we had a dozen high-powered beams focused on the creature. Police car spotlights, emergency flares, portable work lights from the engineering team, anything that could produce intense illumination. The thing writhed and twisted in the air, unable to maintain its solid form under the onslaught of artificial daylight. With a final shriek of rage, it retreated into the darkness beyond the bridge, its red eyes fading until they disappeared entirely. The immediate danger was over, but I knew it wasn't finished with us. This was just a temporary setback for something that had been planning this disaster for months. We kept the bridge closed for 3 weeks while Captain Riley's team worked around the clock to reinforce every cable, joint, and support structure they could reach. I made sure there were floodlights installed on every tower, bright enough to be, seen from space and powerful enough to keep any supernatural predator at bay. But I couldn't shake Emma's vision. December 15th was still coming, and I had a terrible feeling that steel cables and concrete weren't going to be enough. On the morning of December 15th, 1967, I stationed myself at the bridge approach with a truck full of emergency lighting equipment. Sarah had wanted to take the kids to her mother's house in Ohio that day, but I made sure they stayed home. I called in every favor I could think of to convince other families to avoid the bridge that day. It wasn't enough. At 4:47 p.m., during the height of rush hour traffic, the Silver Bridge's North Tower collapsed without warning. The structure folded into the Ohio River in less than a minute, taking 46 vehicles and 75 people with it. The water was so cold that most of the victims died within minutes of hitting the river. I was there when it happened. I saw the cars falling like toys, heard the screams that were cut short by the black water. And in the moment of the collapse, just for an instant, I saw those red eyes watching from the darkness under the bridge, bright with satisfaction as the creature finally got its feast of human suffering. The official investigation blamed metal fatigue and a critical failure in the suspension system. They found stress fractures that had been developing for months, systematic weakening that matched exactly what Captain Riley had discovered. But they never found any evidence of sabotage, supernatural or otherwise. The sightings of the red-eyed creature stopped after the bridge collapse. Whatever it was had gotten what it came for and moved on to wait for the next disaster. But it left something behind. At least for me. I transferred to a desk job the following year. Couldn't handle being out in the field anymore. Couldn't deal with dark places where things might be watching. The nightmares faded after a few years, and my family learned to live with a husband and father who checked every lock twice and kept emergency lights in every room. But sometimes, late at night when I'm watching the news, I catch a glimpse of red eyes reflected in the television screen when they report on disasters around the world. Plane crashes, building collapses, natural disasters that claim dozens or hundreds of lives. And I know that somewhere in the darkness, Ancient things are watching and feeding on our pain. The Mothman of Point Pleasant might be gone, but it wasn't alone. There are others out there, older and hungrier, waiting for their chance to witness the next great tragedy that befalls humanity. If you ever see red eyes watching from the shadows before disaster strikes, don't assume you're safe just because you survived the initial catastrophe. Some things mark you as a witness, and once you've seen them feeding on human suffering, they never quite let you go. I still keep those emergency lights handy, and I still check the locks twice every night, because 40 years later, I can still feel them watching from the darkness, waiting for the next time our civilization's luck runs out. The bridge was rebuilt within a year, stronger and safer than before, but I've never driven across it after dark, and I never will. Some risks aren't worth taking, especially when you know what's waiting in the shadows below. My name is Robert McLeod, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger for 13 years now, working at Cumberland Gap National Historical Park in Kentucky. Most folks think my job is all about hiking trails and telling tourists about Civil War battles. But the truth is, I spend a lot of time dealing with missing people. That's what brought me to Newman's Ridge in August of 1969. The heat that summer was something awful, thick and sticky like breathing through wet cloth. Even under the forest canopy, sweat would pour down your back just from walking. The air hung so heavy you could almost see it. Dr. Sarah Chen, an anthropology professor from the university, had gone missing 3 days earlier. She'd been studying the Melungeon people up on the ridge, folks with mixed blood who'd lived in these mountains for over 200 years. Strange people, the locals said, kept to themselves, had their own ways. I'm part Cherokee myself, from my grandmother's side, so I understood about mountain communities that didn't trust outsiders. My Scottish blood came from my grandfather, a tough old man who taught me that every story has truth buried somewhere inside it. The ridge was 30 miles from the nearest town, connected only by a narrow mountain road that washed out every time it rained hard. No phone lines reached up there. No electric poles either. It was like stepping back in time 50 years. I'd never believed in devil stories and family curses. Always figured they were just ways mountain folks explained genetic disorders and family feuds. But as I drove up that winding road, with the trees pressing close on both sides and the shadows getting deeper, something felt wrong. My radio crackled with static. The county sheriff's voice came through broken and distant. "Bobby, you... careful up there. Them Melungeon families. Warned that professor about certain blood lines." She wouldn't listen. The road got steeper. My truck's engine strained as we climbed higher into the mountains. Through gaps in the trees, I could see other ridges rolling away like green waves, but they looked empty. No smoke from chimneys, no cleared fields, just endless forest. I found Dr. Chen's rental car pulled off the road near a rusted mailbox that said, "Goins." The car doors were unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Her purse sat on the passenger seat with her wallet, driver's license, and $73 in cash. Nobody steals a car and leaves the money behind. Her research materials were scattered across the back seat. Family trees, census records, photographs of weathered headstones. One notebook lay open to a page covered in her neat handwriting. The last entry read, "The Goins family tree doesn't make sense. Too many children born to mothers who died years earlier. Going to check the old cemetery today. Something's very wrong with these records." Below that, in different handwriting, shakier, more urgent, someone had written, "They warned you. Some bloodlines aren't meant to be traced." The mailbox pointed down a dirt path that disappeared into thick woods. I grabbed my .38 revolver, a Coleman lantern, and my radio, though it was nothing but static now. My grandmother always told me to trust my instincts in the mountains. Right then, every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in that truck and drive away. But Dr. Chen was still missing, and park rangers don't abandon people, no matter how scared they get. The path wound through tall pines and thick undergrowth, Honeysuckle vines choked the smaller trees, filling the air with their sweet, heavy smell. But underneath that sweetness was something else, something that reminded me of meat left too long in the heat. After 20 minutes of walking, the trees opened into a small cleat ring. An old log cabin sat in the center, its roof sagging and windows dark. Behind it, I could see weathered headstones poking up through the weeds like broken teeth. The cabin looked empty, but smoke was rising from its chimney. I called out from the edge of the clearing, "Hello? Park Service? Anyone home?" The smoke kept rising, thin and gray against the darkening sky. No answer came from the cabin. Even the birds had gone quiet. My boots made soft sounds in the pine needles as I crossed the clearing. The cabin's front porch sagged under the weight of time, but the wood looked solid enough. I climbed the steps carefully, listening for any sound from inside. The front door stood slightly open. Through the gap, I could see a room lit by firelight. Someone had been here recently. The fire was still burning hot, and I could smell coffee. "Dr. Chen?" I pushed the door wider. "Ma'am, are you in here?" The main room was larger than I'd expected, with hand-hewn beams across the ceiling and a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. A coffee pot sat on an iron hook over the flames. On a rough wooden table, papers were spread out in neat piles. They were Dr. Chen's research notes. I walked closer, my hand resting on my gun. The papers showed family trees going back to the 1820s. All of them focused on one name, Vardy Collins. According to the notes, Collins was the original Melungeon patriarch who'd settled on Newman's Ridge. But something was wrong with his family tree. The records showed Collins having children every few years from 1825 to 1890, a 65-year span. Either he'd lived to be over 100 years old, or someone had made serious mistakes in the county records. Even stranger, many of his children were listed as having the same mother, but the death dates showed she'd died multiple times, in 1834, 1847, 1859, and 1871. A loose photograph caught my eye. It showed a group of people standing in front of this very cabin. The picture looked old, maybe from the 1920s based on the clothing, but the faces were crystal clear, like it had been taken yesterday. In the center stood a tall man with dark hair and pale eyes. He looked exactly like someone I'd seen before, but I couldn't place where. Around him were women, children, and elderly folks. 3 generations of family, all with the same strange mix of features that marked Melungeon heritage. What made my skin crawl was that they all looked exactly the same age as in the 1920s photo, but there were other pictures scattered on the table. Same people, same faces, but in 1940s clothing. Then 1960s clothing. The most recent photo was dated just last week. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, my hand going to my gun. A woman stood in the doorway, elderly, with long gray hair and skin that looked like worn leather. She wore a faded dress that might have been blue once, and her feet were bare. "Ma'am, I'm looking for Dr. Chen. She's been missing for 3 days." The woman's eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost white. She came asking questions about the bloodline. We told her some family trees grow in dark soil. "Where is she now?" "Where she belongs." The woman stepped into the room. As she moved closer to the firelight, her face seemed to shift and change. For a moment, she looked like a young woman, then like a child, then old again. "Just like you'll be where you belong, Bobby McLeod." I hadn't told her my name. "How do you know who I am?" She smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. "Your grandmother was Mary Crow Feather, died when you were 12. She taught you the old ways, but you stopped believing after she passed." My blood went cold. Those were things only family would know. "She used to make cornbread in an iron skillet," the woman continued. "Told you stories about the little people and warned you never to follow strange lights in the forest. Said Cherokee blood would protect you from some things, but not everything." I drained, dropping my gun, hands shaking. "Who are you?" "I'm family, Bobby. We're all family here." She spread her arms wide. Look closer at those pictures. Against my better judgment, I glanced down at the photographs. In the newest one, standing next to the pale-eyed man, was my grandmother. But she looked exactly as she had when I was a child. Not aged, not changed, wearing clothes from last week. That's impossible. She died 21 years ago. Did she? The woman's voice was different now, younger, more familiar. When I looked up, she had my grandmother's face. Maybe she just came home, Bobby. Maybe she's been waiting for you to come home, too. I ran. I crashed through the door and stumbled off the porch, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, I heard laughter that sounded like wind through dry leaves. But when I reached the edge of the clearing and looked back, the cabin was dark. No smoke rose from the chimney. The windows were boarded up with rotting wood. The path back to the road seemed longer than before. Shadows moved between the trees in ways that didn't match the wind. Twice I heard my name being called in my grandmother's voice, but I kept running. When I finally reached Dr. Chen's rental car, I was gasping for air and soaked with sweat. My radio was working again, crackling with the sheriff's voice. Bobby, you copy? Found some of that professor's clothes down by Miller's Creek. Looks like she won't be needing them anymore. I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. What do you mean? Blood, Bobby. Lots of it. And they're arranged strange. Like somebody laid them out on purpose. You need to get down here now. I looked back up the path toward the dark woods. Somewhere in there, Dr. Chen was dead. And whatever had killed her knew things about my family that it shouldn't know. My grandmother's voice whispered in my memory. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I had the terrible feeling I'd just opened one of those doors. I found Sheriff Porter and 2 deputies at Miller's Creek about a mile down the ridge from the Goins place. They'd strung yellow tape around a circle of old oak trees, and their faces were grim in the fading daylight. What have you got, Sheriff? Porter was a thin man with nervous hands who'd held the job for 30 years. He'd seen plenty of mountain violence, family feuds, drunk hunters, domestic disputes. But he looked shaken now. See for yourself, Bobby. But I'm warning you, it's not natural. Dr. Chen's clothes were spread in a perfect circle around the base of the largest oak tree. Her hiking boots, jeans, shirt, and jacket, all of them cut clean like someone had used surgical scissors. No tears or rips that you'd expect from an animal attack. But it was the blood that made my stomach turn. It hadn't just splattered or pooled like you'd expect from violence. Instead, it formed patterns on the ground, symbols that looked almost like writing. The blood was still wet, even though she'd been missing for 3 days. Any sign of the body? I asked. That's the thing, Deputy Harris said. He was a young man, barely out of high school, and his voice shook. We've searched every inch of these woods, got dogs from 3 counties. No body, no trail, nothing. Just her clothes and this. He pointed to something carved into the oak tree's bark. Fresh cuts, white wood showing through the gray bark. The symbol looked like a family tree, but upside down. Roots reaching toward the sky, branches digging into the earth. Ever see anything like that before? Porter asked. I had. In my grandmother's old books about Cherokee beliefs. It was a warning symbol, meaning the natural order had been turned upside down. Dead things walking, living things dying, past and present all mixed up. Sheriff, I need to tell you what I found up at the cabin. I explained about the photographs, the impossible family records, the woman who knew things she shouldn't know, Crescent. Eder listened without interrupting, but I could see doubt in his eyes. Bobby, you've been under a lot of stress lately, working too many missing person cases. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. A scream cut through the air. We all froze. The sound came from deeper in the woods, high and desperate. Human, female. That's her, I said. That's Dr. Chen. Porter shook his head. Can't be. Not after 3 days with this much blood loss. The scream came again, closer this time. Then we heard running footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. Dr. Chen burst into the clearing. She was alive, unhurt, wearing clean clothes. Her hair was neat, Her face wasn't scratched, and she moved like someone who'd been taking a pleasant walk. But her eyes were wrong. Too wide, too pale, like she was looking through us at something we couldn't see. "Dr. Chen?" I started toward her. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" She stopped running and stared at us with those strange eyes. "You have to leave this place. They're coming back. They're always coming back." "Who's coming back?" Porter stepped closer. "Ma'am, these are your clothes here. We found them with blood. Can you explain what happened?" Dr. Chen looked down at the circle of bloody clothing. Her face showed no recognition, like she was seeing them for the first time. "Those aren't mine," she said. "Mine are back at the cabin, hanging on the line to dry." Deputy Harris pointed at her. "Ma'am, you're wearing the exact same outfit." She looked down at herself, confusion spreading across her face. I bought these in town. Yesterday. Or was it today?" Her voice got smaller. "What day is it?" "It's Thursday, August 14th, Porter said gently. "You've been missing since Monday." "Monday?" She laughed, but it sounded broken. "I just had breakfast with the family. Vardy made pancakes. The children were playing in the yard." My blood went cold. "Ma'am, Vardy Collins died over 100 years ago." "No." She shook her head violently. "No, he made pancakes. He's making them right now. You can smell the bacon cooking, the wind shift." And I caught a whiff of something that made my mouth water. Bacon frying, coffee brewing, fresh bread baking. But we were miles from any inhabited house. "Dr. Chen," I said carefully, "do you remember coming to the mountain to research Melungeon genealogy?" Her eyes focused on me for the first time. "You're the ranger, Bobby McLeod. Your grandmother was Mary Crow Feather." "How do you know that?" "She told me, at breakfast. She said you'd be coming soon and we should make you feel welcome. Said you were family." Porter and Harris exchanged glances. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could see it wasn't normal. "Ma'am," Porter said, "I think you need medical attention. You've been through some kind of trauma." Dr. Chen's laugh got higher, more desperate. "Trauma? No trauma. Just family dinner. Every meal for 150 years. Same faces, same conversations, same food getting cold because nobody really eats anymore." She grabbed my arm, and her fingers were ice cold despite the August heat. "They're not people, Bobby. They look like people, but they're not. They're memories wearing skin. And once you sit down at their table, you become a memory too." "What table?" "At the cabin. Vardy's cabin. Where families gather and nobody ever leaves." The smell of bacon got stronger. In the distance, I heard children laughing and playing. But the sound was coming from the direction of the old cabin, and I was certain no children lived on Newman's Ridge. Dr. Chen's grip tightened on my arm. "They're calling us for dinner, Bobby. They're always calling us for dinner." Porter stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us. We'll get you checked out by a doctor, then—" Dr. Chen screamed, but this time it wasn't her voice. It was multiple voices. Men, women, children, all screaming together through her throat. Her face began to channel. Features shifting like water. For a moment she looked like an old man with pale eyes, then a young woman, then a child. Then she wasn't Dr. Chen anymore. She was my grandmother, exactly, as I remembered her from when I was 12 years old. "Bobby," she said in grandmother's voice, "why don't you come home for dinner? The family's waiting." I stumbled backward, my gun in my hand but shaking so bad I couldn't aim it properly. The thing wearing my grandmother's face smiled with too many teeth. "Put that away, Bobby. You don't want to hurt family." Sheriff Porter was backing toward his car, his own weapon drawn. "What in the hell? Language, Sheriff," the thing said, now sounding like a stern schoolmarm. "Children are present." I could hear them now, kids laughing and playing somewhere in the woods around us. But when I looked toward the sounds, I saw figures moving between the trees. Pale figures in old-fashioned clothing, all walking toward our little clearing. "Bobby," my grandmother's voice said, "you've been away too long. It's time to come home." The figure that had been Dr. Chen began to change again. Now it was a tall man with dark hair and pale eyes. The same man from the photographs. Vardy Collins himself. I made a deal, he said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Back in 1823, when they wanted to drive us from these mountains. Called us half-breeds, said we didn't belong anywhere. I found something old in a cave, something that promised to protect my family forever. More figures stepped into the clearing. Men, women, children, all with that same pale-eyed look. Some wore clothing from the 1800s, others from the 1920s, still others from just last year. They formed a circle around us. The devil kept his bargain, Vardy continued. My family would never be driven from this land. We'd never die, never fade away, never be forgotten. But there was a price, I said, understanding flooding through me. There's always a price. He smiled sadly. We stopped being human, became something else, something that feeds on identity, on memory, on the stories that make people who they are. Sheriff Porter fired his gun. The bullet passed right through Vardy and struck a tree behind him. The figures around us laughed like children at a party game. You can't kill something that's already dead, Vardy said. But you can join it. You can become part of the family. The smell of cooking food got stronger. My stomach growled despite my terror. When was the last time I'd eaten? I couldn't remember. We know all about you, Bobby McLeod, Vardy said. 13 years as a park ranger. No wife, no children. Your parents died in a car crash when you were 19. The only family you ever really had was your Cherokee grandmother, and she's been dead 21 years. One of the figures stepped forward, a young woman in a 1940s dress. Lonely, isn't he? She said to Vardy. Been lonely his whole life. Always felt like he didn't belong anywhere. Too Cherokee for the white world, too white for the reservation. We can fix that, said another figure, this one a child. Here, everyone belongs. Here, everyone's family. I felt my gun getting heavy in my hand. The idea of setting it down, of walking over to join their circle, started to seem reasonable. They were right. I had been lonely. I'd spent my whole adult life taking care of other people's problems, protecting other people's families, while I had none of my own. Come home, Bobby, my grandmother's voice whispered. Come sit at our table. I took a step toward them. Then I remembered something grandmother had actually told me the last time I saw her alive. The old spirits are hungry, Bobby. They'll promise you everything you want, but they'll take everything you are. When something offers to make you part of its family, you run. You run and don't look back. I pulled out my cigarette lighter, a cheap Zippo, but it had Cherokee symbols etched on the side. Grand. Mother had given it to me for my 16th birthday. Fire, I said. The old spirits hate fire. I flicked the lighter open and struck it. The small flame danced in the growing darkness. The figures around us hissed and stepped back. Their faces began to change, becoming less human, more twisted. You can't burn all of Newman's Ridge, Vardy snarled. This is our home. No, I said, understanding finally dawning. This isn't your home. You're trapped here by the contract you made. The devil's bargain. And I bet that contract is written down somewhere, isn't it? Old contracts usually are. Vardy's eyes went wide. You don't understand what you're messing with, boy. But I was already running toward the old cabin, my lighter held high. Behind me, I heard Sheriff Porter and his deputies shouting, their car doors slamming. They were smart enough to follow my lead. The figures gave chase, but they moved strangely, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, like they were fighting against invisible chains. They could only go so far from their center of power. I reached the cabin as full darkness fell. It looked solid again, smoke rising from the chimney, warm light glowing in the windows. But I could see through the illusion now. Underneath the cozy home was something else. Rotting logs, broken windows, a roof caved in by decades of weather. The front door stood open. Inside I could see a table set for dinner, with dozens of place settings and food that steamed in the lamplight. At the head of the table sat an old leather book. The contract. I stepped onto the porch. The floorboards groaned under my feet. Some were completely rotten through. But the illusion held strong, making everything look perfect and inviting. Bobby, don't do this. My grandmother stood in the doorway, but her face was melting, showing the thing underneath. We can be together. Forever. Grandmother would never ask me to stop being myself, I said. You're not her. You're just wearing her memory. I pushed past the creature and grabbed the book from the table. It was bound in leather that felt wrong, too smooth, too warm, like it was still alive. The pages were covered in writing that seemed to move in the lamplight. At the top of the first page, in faded ink, was written, "Contract between Vardy Collins and the Nameless One for the protection of the Melungeon bloodline, signed this day in the year of our Lord, 1823. I held my lighter to the bottom of the page. No! The thing that wore my grandmother's face lunged at me. I dropped the lighter. The old leather caught fire immediately, flames racing across the pages. The whole book went up like it had been soaked in gasoline. The cabin began to shake. Outside, the figures in the clearing were screaming. Not human screams, but the sound wind makes through empty spaces. Reality started to crack around me. Through the gaps, I could see what the cabin really was, a ruin that had been falling apart for 50 years. The table was rotted wood covered in moss. The food was just leaves and animal bones. And sitting in the corner, partly hidden by shadows, was Dr. Chen's body. She'd been dead for days. The thing wearing my grandmother's face was changing again, becoming something with too many limbs and eyes like holes in the world. You've destroyed us, it hissed. But you'll die here too. The flames from the burning contract were spreading, catching the dry wood of the cabin. I had maybe 30 seconds before the whole place went up. I grabbed Dr. Chen's body and threw her over my shoulder. She was lighter than she should have been, like something had been sucked out of her. The creature lunged at me as I ran for the door. Its claws raked across my back, tearing through my shirt and into skin. But I was already outside, stumbling off the porch as the cabin exploded into flames behind me. The figures in the clearing were dissolving like smoke. Their screams faded to whispers, then to nothing. Sheriff Port found me collapsed at the edge of the woods, Dr. Chen's body beside me, and my back bleeding from 4 long scratches. Bobby, what happened up there? I looked back toward where the cabin had been. Nothing but dark forest now, and the smell of smoke fading on the wind. Gas leak, I said. Old place went up like a tinderbox. He didn't believe me, but he didn't ask more questions either. Some things are easier not to know. They found me on the county road at dawn, sitting beside Dr. Chen's body with no memory of how I'd gotten there. That's the official story anyway. The truth is, some memories are too dangerous to share. Dr. Chen's death was ruled a hiking accident. The report said she fell and hit her head on a rock, then died from exposure. No mention of the blood symbols or the impossible family photographs. No mention of the cabin that burned down, but left no ashes. The county removed Newman's Ridge from all the official maps. Said it was part of a cartographic error correction project. Now, if you look up the area, you'll find nothing but national forest. No settlements, no family names, no history at all. I went back to my regular ranger duties, but something had changed. The first thing I noticed was my reflection. In mirrors, in windows, in still water. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of other faces looking back at me. Faces I didn't recognize, but that seemed familiar somehow. Then the dreams started. Every night I'd dream about sitting at a dinner table with people I'd never met. They'd all look at me with pale eyes and talk about family reunions I'd never attended, relatives I'd never had. In the dreams, I belonged with them completely. I started taking DNA tests just to be sure of who I was. The first one came back showing 40% Cherokee, 35% Scottish, 25% Irish. Normal enough. But when I took the same test 6 months later, the results were different. Now I was 30% Cherokee, 20% Scottish, 15% Irish, and 35% undetermined European. The third test was even stranger. 25% Cherokee, 10% Scottish, 5% Irish, 15% African, 20% Mediterranean, and 25% sample contaminated, results unavailable. My family photos started changing too. Pictures I'd had for years would suddenly show different people. Relatives I'd never seen before would appear in old family gatherings, standing right next to my grandmother like they'd always been there. When I'd look at the photos again the next day, they'd be back to normal. But the strangest thing was the mail. I started getting Christmas cards from families I'd never met. The Goins, the Collins, the Mullinses, all common Melungeon surnames. The cards showed happy families at holiday gatherings, with handwritten notes like, "Can't wait to see you at the reunion," and "The whole family misses you." When I tried to trace the return addresses, they all led to Newman's Ridge. But according to every map and county record, Newman's Ridge didn't exist. I consulted with Cherokee elders about what had happened to me. They listened to my story without judgment, then told me something that chilled my blood. Some spirits don't die when you kill them, they just get hungry. And the hungrier they get, the more they need to feed. "What do they feed on?" I asked. "Identity," the eldest said. "They eat who you are, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but an empty space shaped like a person. Then they move in." I've been fighting it for 6 years now. Some days are better than others. I keep Cherokee sage burning in my house, wear the protective amulets my grandmother taught me to make, and never eat food that strangers offer me. But I can feel it working, slow and patient. In quiet moments, I'll catch myself remembering things that never happened to me. Family dinners with people I've never met, conversations with relatives who died before I was born. A whole life lived by someone else, trying to overwrite my own memories. The worst part is how good those false memories feel. In them, I'm never lonely. I always belong somewhere. I'm part of something larger than myself. If you're reading this, it means I finally lost the fight. By the time you find this account, I'll probably be sitting at a dinner table somewhere on Newman's Ridge, smiling with pale eyes and calling strangers family. But I need to warn you about something. The entity I encountered wasn't unique. My research has turned up similar stories throughout Appalachian history. Families that made deals with things in the darkness, people who disappeared and came back wrong, communities that exist on some maps but not others. If you're ever doing research in remote mountain communities and the locals warn you about certain bloodlines, listen to them. Some family trees have roots that go deeper than soil, and some ancestors never really die. And if someone you've never met invites you to dinner, claiming your family, don't go. No matter how hungry you are, no matter how lonely you've been, don't sit at their table. Because once you do, you'll never leave. The Melungeon devil is still out there, still hungry, still looking for new family members. And every person it claims makes it stronger, gives it more faces to wear, more memories to use as bait. I hope my sacrifice bought the world some time. But I fear it only taught the thing to be more careful, more patient in its hunting. Watch your family photos. Check your DNA results twice. And if you start dreaming about dinners you never attended with people you've never met, run. Don't look back, and don't trust anyone who claims to be family. Some families are best left behind. My name is Thomas Caldwell, and I've been a ranger at Daniel Ridge State Forest for 16 years now. Most folks just call me Tom. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in Pine Ridge Hollow back in October of '73. The official reports won't tell you the truth. Hell, they won't even tell you half of it. I grew up in these West Virginia mountains, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. Third-generation Appalachian, born and raised on stories about haints and hollow folk. But I never put much stock in them old tales. Always figured they were just stories to keep city folks from wandering where they shouldn't, keep them from getting lost in places where a man could disappear forever. Pine Ridge Hollow sits about 18 miles northeast of Harlan, tucked away in a valley system that runs 12 miles long through limestone ridges. It's got more caves than you can count and old coal mines from the 40s that nobody's mapped proper. The whole area's got a history of people going missing, but I always blamed that on folks not knowing the country. These mountains can swallow you up quick if you don't respect them. It was late October when everything started. The first frost had come early that year, killing off the last of the leaves before they could turn proper colors. Fog would settle in the valleys, thick as soup come evening, and hunting season was bringing more folks than usual into the backcountry. That's when the Morrison family from Ohio went missing. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Family of 5, parents and 3 kids, ages 6 to 14, had been camping in Pine Ridge Hollow for 3 days. Should have checked in with the ranger station Monday night. When they didn't show, the campground host went to check on them. Found their RV at the trailhead with both doors standing wide open. Engine was still running. Food was still cooking on the camp stove, beans burned black to the bottom of the pot. Tent was set up neat as you please, sleeping bags laid out like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But no sign of the family anywhere. I grabbed my gear, radio, 6-cell maglite, topographic maps, climbing rope, first aid kit, and my service revolver, and headed out there with Jake Morrison, another ranger who'd been working these woods about as long as I had. Jake brought his tracking dogs, 2 blue-tick hounds that could follow a 3-day-old trail through running water. The October air was sharp and clean, way it gets when winter's coming on. Should have been perfect tracking weather. Birds should have been making noise. Squirrels should have been busy gathering nuts. But as we got closer to Pine Ridge Hollow, everything went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get deep in the woods. The wrong kind. The kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. I'd been working search and rescue in these mountains for most of my adult life. Cave rescues were my specialty. I knew every limestone formation and mine entrance in a 50-square-mile area. I'd pulled lost hikers out of places so tight you had to exhale to squeeze through. I'd rappelled into pits so deep your light couldn't find the bottom. But I'd never felt anything like what I felt walking into Pine Ridge Hollow that morning. The temperature dropped 15 degrees soon as we entered the valley. My breath started steaming, even though it was near 70 degrees back at the ranger station. The fog that should have burned off by 10 in the morning was still hanging thick between the trees, moving in ways that didn't match the wind. And then there were the dogs. Blue and Belle, 2 of the best tracking hounds in the state, started whimpering soon as we got to the campsite. They'd picked up the trail easy enough. Sets of footprints leading away from the camp and into the tree line. But when we followed those prints about 100 yards into the woods, both dogs just stopped dead. Wouldn't go. Another step. Just sat down and howled like something had died. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with your usual missing persons case. The footprints were clear enough at first. 2 adults, 3 children, all wearing different types of boots and shoes, easy to follow on the soft ground between the trees. But about 200 yards from camp, something changed. The prints got different. They were still the same size, same boot treads, but the spacing was wrong. Like the family had suddenly started taking longer steps, or maybe not putting their full weight down. In some places, it looked like they were barely touching the ground at all. "Tom," Jake called out, kneeling down next to a clear print in the mud. "Come look at this." I walked over and crouched down beside him. It was the father's boot print, size 11 work boot, with a distinctive wear pattern on the heel. But the impression was only about half as deep as it should have been for a man his size carrying a pack. "Maybe they dropped their gear somewhere," Jake suggested, but his voice didn't sound convinced. We followed the trail another quarter-mile into the hollow. The trees grew thicker here, big old hemlocks that blocked out most of the sky. Rhododendron bushes grew so thick on either side of the game trail that locals called them hells. Once you got tangled up in them, you might never find your way out. That's where we found the first of the children's toys. It was a little stuffed bear, brown and worn like it had been loved hard by small hands. But it wasn't dropped careless-like. It was placed deliberate on a flat rock, sitting upright like someone had positioned it just so. 20 feet further on, we found a toy truck, then a doll. All of them arranged neat and careful, like markers on a trail. "Kids don't drop their toys like this," I said to Jake. "They clutch onto them when they're scar." Jake nodded, but he was looking up at the trees. Following his gaze, I saw something that made my blood run cold. About 20 feet up in an old oak tree, there was adult clothing folded neat as laundry day. A man's flannel shirt and blue jeans, clean as if they'd just come out of the wash. "How the hell did those get up there?" Jake whispered. I'd been asking myself the same question. No branches broken, no sign of anyone climbing, just clothes folded perfect and placed on a branch too high for any normal person to reach. My radio crackled to life, but instead of the dispatcher's voice, all I heard was a strange harmonic tone, like someone humming a tune with no words. I tried to respond, but got nothing but that weird musical sound. Jake tried his radio too, same thing. "Equipment failure," Jake said, but I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. We kept following the trail deeper into the hollow. The footprints were getting stranger, sometimes disappearing completely for 10 or 20 feet, then picking up again like the family had just started walking on solid ground out of thin air. My compass started acting up too, needles spinning wild whenever we got near certain rock formations. The trail led us toward the mouth of one of the bigger cave systems in the area. I'd mapped most of it years back. Went down about 300 feet before opening up into a series of chambers that connected to an underground river. The entrance was a natural archway in the limestone about 8 feet high and 6 feet wide, big enough for a family to walk through without ducking. But as we got closer to that cave mouth, both dogs started going crazy. They wouldn't go within 50 feet of the entrance, just sat down and howled like their hearts were breaking. The hair on their backs was standing straight up, and they kept looking over their shoulders like something was following us. That's when I heard it for the first time. A voice calling from somewhere deep in the cave. A woman's voice, sweet and familiar, calling my name. "Tom? Tom, honey, are you there?" My heart stopped. I knew that voice. I'd been married to it for 12 years before cancer took her away 3 years ago. It was my wife Sarah calling to me from inside that cave, using the same pet name she'd always called me. Jake was looking at me strange. "You hear that?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Sounds like a woman calling for help," he said. "Must be the mother." But it wasn't the mother. It was Sarah's voice, clear as day, speaking words I remembered from the last night I spent with her in the hospital. Words she'd whispered to me right before she closed her eyes for the last time. "I'll wait for you, Tom. I'll wait for you to come find me." Jake started toward the cave entrance, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said. "Something's not right here." But even as I said it, I could feel that voice pulling at me, drawing me toward the darkness like a fish on a line. Because even though my brain knew it couldn't be her, my heart wanted to believe it was possible. Wanted to believe that somewhere in the dark below, Sarah was waiting for me to come home. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around and walk away, we entered the cave. I'd been in this system dozens of times over the years, but it felt different now. Colder. The beam from my mag light seemed weaker, like the darkness was eating up the light. The main passage sloped downward at a gentle angle, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. The walls were smooth limestone, worn by centuries of water flow. Our footsteps echoed weird in the silence, sometimes sounding like more footsteps than just the 2 of us were making. About 100 feet in, we found the father. Robert Morrison, 42 years old from Cincinnati, was lying in a shallow side chamber like he'd just laid down for a nap. His eyes were closed, hands folded across his chest, looking peaceful as anything. But when I knelt down to check for a pulse, my blood turned to ice water. He'd been dead for months. His clothes were rotted nearly through, fabric falling apart at my touch. His skin had the waxy, preserved look of a body that's been kept somewhere cold and dry. But according to the campground records, the Morrison family had only been missing for 3 days. "That's impossible," Jake whispered, kneeling down beside me. "The family just got here Sunday." But there was no arguing with what we were seeing. This man had been dead long enough for his wedding ring to slip off his finger and land in the dirt beside his hand. Long enough for his wallet to fall apart from moisture and time. I opened what was left of his wallet with shaking hands. The driver's license was readable, barely. Robert Morrison, Cincinnati address, expiration date next year. But the photo looked like it had been taken decades ago, faded and yellowed around the edges. "We need to get out of here," I said, standing up fast. "We need to call this in to the state police." But Jake was already walking deeper into the cave, following the beam of his flashlight toward voices that seemed to be coming from the main chamber ahead. "Jake, wait!" I called after him. But my voice came back at me wrong, echoing with harmonics that sounded like multiple people saying my name. I caught up with him at the entrance to the big chamber, a natural room about the size of a basketball court with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above our lights. And that's where we found the rest of them. Linda Morrison and her 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and little Emma, were sitting around what looked like the remains of an old campfire. They were alive, but something was terribly wrong with them. Their skin was pale as milk, so white it seemed to glow in our flashlight beams. Their eyes were completely black, no white chotin, wing at all, just dark pools that reflected our lights like water. When they saw us, they all turned their heads at exactly the same time, moving like they were connected by invisible strings. "Hello?" they said in perfect unison, their voices flat and emotionless. "We've been waiting for you." The mother stood up first, moving with jerky, unnatural motions like a marionette. "We belong to the Hollow now," she said, and her children nodded along with every word. "We're so much happier here, so much colder, so much darker." Jake took a step backward, his hand moving toward his service weapon. "Ma'am, we're park rangers. We're here to help you. Your family's been reported missing." All 4 of them laughed at the same time, a sound like breaking glass. "Missing?" the oldest boy said. "We're not missing. We're found. We're home." That's when I noticed the walls. The chamber was covered in drawings, carved deep into the limestone with something sharp. Pictures of tall, impossibly thin figures leading families into caves. Children holding hands with creatures that looked more like stick insects than people. The drawings covered every inch of the walls, stretching up into the darkness above our lights. Some of the drawings looked fresh, carved with clean, sharp lines. Others were weathered and old, worn smooth by years of moisture. But they all showed the same thing: families disappearing into the earth, guided by things that barely looked human. "How long have you been down here?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Time doesn't matter in the Hollow," little Emma said in her 6-year-old voice. "Time is for the surface. Down here, we just are." Jake grabbed my arm. "Tom, we need to go, right now." But before we could take a step toward the entrance, something moved in the shadows beyond our lights. Something tall and thin and wrong, sliding along the cave wall like liquid shadow given form. The Morrison family smiled with their black eyes and pale faces. "They want to meet you," Mrs. Morrison said. "They've been waiting so long for new friends." And then the lights went out. Not just our flashlights, they were still working, still throwing beams of light. But the darkness ate the light like it was alive, swallowing every photon before it could travel more than a few feet. We were standing in perfect black, surrounded by things we could hear moving but couldn't see. Jake fired his weapon. The muzzle flash lit up the chamber for a split second, and in that brief moment of illumination, I saw them. The Hollow Men, 9 feet tall and thin as scarecrows, with skin like wet paper and eyes like holes punched in their skulls, arms that stretched too long and fingers that ended in points like knitting needles. They moved like smoke given form, bending and flowing around the cave walls in ways that shouldn't have been possible. There were dozens of them, filling every corner of the chamber, watching us with those empty eye sockets. And they were all smiling. In the darkness after Jake's gunshot, I heard something that made my knees nearly buckle. Sarah's voice again, but closer this time, coming from right beside my ear. "Tom, honey, don't fight them. They're not here to hurt you. They're here to bring us together again. Forever." I spun around, swinging my flashlight in an arc, and caught a glimpse of something impossible. One of the Hollow Men had Sarah's face, her features stretched over its skeletal frame like a mask that didn't quite fit. It was wearing her wedding dress, the blue one she'd been buried in, but the fabric was tattered and stained with cave mud. "That's not her," I said out loud, as much to convince myself as anyone else. "That's not my wife." The thing wearing Sarah's face tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "But I could be," it said in her voice. "I could be her forever." All you have to do is stay. All you have to do is join us in the hollow. Jake was beside me, breathing hard. I could hear him fumbling with something in his pack. Emergency flares from the sound of it. Smart man. Light was the only thing that seemed to bother these creatures. Tom, he whispered, when I light this flare, we run. Straight back the way we came, fast as we can. But before he could strike the flare, one of the real hollow men stepped forward into what little light we had left. This one was different from the others, older, more substantial. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through dry leaves. You cannot leave, it said. No one leaves the hollow once they've seen us. You belong to us now, just like all the others. All the others? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. The creature gestured toward the walls, and suddenly I could see them clearly despite the darkness. Dozens of bodies, arranged in family groups, sitting against the limestone like they were just resting. Men, women, children, all with the same pale skin and black eyes as the Morrison family. Some of their clothes looked like they were from this decade. Others looked much older. 80 years, the creature said. 80 years of families joining us, becoming part of the hollow. They live here now, in the cold and the dark, and they are so much happier than they ever were in the light. I looked closer at the bodies along the walls and realized they weren't all dead. Some of them were breathing. Some of them were watching us with those terrible black eyes, smiling like they knew a secret we didn't understand yet. The families serve us for a time, the creature continued. They help us bring others home. And when they have served long enough, they become like us, hollow, empty, perfect. That's when Jake lit the flare. The red light filled the chamber like liquid fire, and every single one of the hollow men screamed. Not with voices. They didn't seem to have vocal cords in any normal sense, but with a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. They flowed backward into the shadows, their translucent skin apparently unable to rate the intense light. "Move!" Jake shouted, and we ran. Behind us, I could hear the Morrison family calling out in their flat, emotionless voices. "Don't leave us! Don't leave us alone with them!" But we couldn't help them. Whatever had been done to them, whatever they'd become, they weren't human anymore. They belonged to the hollow now, just like they'd said. We ran through the main passage as fast as we could, Jake's flare throwing wild shadows on the cave walls. Behind us, we could hear the hollow men following, but the light kept them at a distance. They moved through passages too narrow for humans, their elongated limbs allowing them to flow through cracks in the rock like water. We were almost to the entrance when Jake stumbled and fell. I heard his leg snap like a dry branch, heard him cry out in pain. The flare went skittering across the cave floor, still burning but no longer in his hand. "Go," he gasped. "Get to the surface. Get help." But I couldn't leave him. Jake Morrison had been my partner for 8 years. We'd pulled each other out of more tight spots than I could count. I wasn't about to abandon him now. I grabbed the flare and helped him to his feet, letting him lean on me as we hobbled toward the cave entrance. The hollow men were getting closer, their inhuman sounds echoing off the walls around us. They were testing the light, seeing how close they could get before the flare forced them back. And then I saw our way out. The cave entrance opened onto the underground river that I'd mapped years before. The water was deep and cold, fed by mountain springs, but it led to the surface about 3 miles downstream. If we could make it to the water, if we could swim that distance in October mountain water, we might have a chance. "Jake," I said, "how well can you swim with a broken leg?" He looked at the dark water flowing past the cave mouth and understood immediately. "Better than I can walk." We made it to the water just as the flare was starting to die down. I could hear the hollow men getting closer, their whispered voices promising us eternal peace in the dark below the earth. The water was so cold it knocked the breath out of me. Jake cried out when his broken leg hit the current, but he held on. I kept one arm around him and used the other to swim, letting the underground river carry us away from Pine Ridge Hollow and the things that lived there. We made it to the surface 3 miles downstream, both of us half dead from hypothermia and exhaustion. Jake's leg was broken bad. He ended up losing it to frostbite, took early retirement after that. Neither one of us ever talked about what we'd seen in that cave, Not to the state police, not to our supervisors, not even to each other. The official report said the Morrison family died in a wilderness accident. Their bodies were never found, which wasn't unusual in country like that. Caves and mine shafts could swallow evidence of a dozen families without anyone ever finding a trace. 2 weeks after we got out of Pine Ridge Hollow, the state came in with concrete trucks and steel barriers, sealed up every cave entrance they could find, claimed it was due to geological instability, posted signs warning people away from the entire valley system. But I know the real reason they sealed those caves. Jake and I weren't the first rangers to encounter the Hollow Men. We were just the first ones to make it out alive and keep our mouths shut about it. The state had been dealing with disappearances in Pine Ridge Hollow for decades, maybe longer. They knew something was down there. They'd always known. I transferred to administrative duties after that, never worked backcountry again. Couldn't handle being underground. Couldn't even go into the basement of my own house without breaking out in a cold sweat. My supervisor said I was suffering from post-traumatic stress, gave me a desk job and a pat on the back. If only it had ended there. About 6 months after Pingas's Ridge Hollow was sealed, I started seeing them around my property at night. Tall, thin shapes standing at the edge of the tree line, just watching. They never came closer than about 50 yards, never tried to enter the house. They just stood there among the trees, patient as death, waiting. My son Michael started sleepwalking around that time. Found him one morning standing in the yard in his pajamas, facing the woods where I'd seen the shapes. When I asked him about it, he said he'd been dreaming about a lady who looked like his mother, my Sarah, calling to him from somewhere cold and dark. That's when I realized the truth. The Hollow Men weren't just random predators hunting for families to drag underground. They were collectors. They took families and kept them for generations, using them, changing them, making them into something else. And when a family line started to run out, when the current generation got too old or too changed to be useful anymore, they went looking for replacements. Sarah had been dead for 3 years when I went into that cave. But the Hollow Men had been watching our family long before that, studying us, learning about us. They knew about my son, about my line. They knew that eventually they'd need to replace the families they'd already claimed. And they were patient. They could wait decades, generations if they had to. Time didn't mean the same thing to them as it did to us. Last week, Michael started talking about the dreams again. He's 16 now, old enough to make his own decisions about where he goes and what he does, old enough to walk into the woods on his own if something calls to him. The official barriers around Pine Ridge Hollow are still in place, but I know they won't stop the Hollow Men if they decide it's time to collect what they think belongs to them. Concrete and steel can't hold back things that move like smoke, and live in the spaces between solid matter. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know the truth about what happened in October of 1973. Someone needs to know that there are things living in the deep places under these mountains, things that have been there longer than human memory, things that think of us as cattle, as breeding stock, as resources to be managed and harvested. If you're ever hiking in Appalachian cave country and you hear familiar voices calling from underground, don't follow them. Don't trust them, no matter how much they sound like someone you love. Some family reunions last forever, and forever is a very long time to spend in the cold and the dark. The Hollow Men are still out there, in caves that connect to other caves, in mine shafts that go deeper than anyone ever mapped. They're still patient, still waiting, still collecting families when the need arises. And late at night, when the fog rolls in thick between the trees, I can still hear Sarah's voice calling my name from somewhere far underground, promising me that if I just walk into the darkness, we can be together again. But I know better now. I know that whatever is using her voice, whatever wore her face in that cave, it isn't her. It's something hollow, something empty, something that feeds on love and loss and the desperate hope that death isn't really the end. My name is Thomas Caldwell, and I've been running from the Hollow for 30 years. But I'm getting old now, and my son is starting to hear the voices too. And I'm afraid that soon, very soon, the Hollow Men are going to get tired of waiting. My name is Jimmy Holloway, and I've been a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 9 years now, born and raised in these hills, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. My grandfather used to run moonshine through these same hollows back in the day, so I know every deer trail, every hidden spring, every old cabin foundation for 100 miles around. That's why they called me when Sarah Chen went missing. Sarah was a graduate student from the University of Tennessee, studying old Appalachian folklore. Smart girl, real respectful of the mountain ways. She had all the right permits, knew how to camp proper, and had been documenting abandoned homesteads for her research. Her advisor said she was excited about finding some place called Bone Valley, an old settlement she'd read about in Civil War records. I knew the spot. Most folks had forgotten about it, but my grandfather used to tell stories. Said there was a woman lived back there during the war, helped Confederate deserters hide from Union soldiers. Called her Granny Aldrich, though nobody knew if that was her real name. The old-timers said she knew things, herb medicine, weather signs, how to find lost things. Of course, they also said she could curse a man just by looking at him wrong. Never put much stock in granny magic and witch tales myself. Figured they were just old ways of explaining things science hadn't caught up to yet. November in the high country gets cold fast. First snow had already dusted the peaks, and the bare trees made everything look like bones against the gray sky. I found Sarah's camp easy enough. She'd set up near the old trail marker that led to Bone Valley. But her tent was empty, sleeping bag still warm, coffee pot half full, and still steaming. That bothered me. Sarah had been missing for 2 days, according to her advisor, but that coffee couldn't have been sitting there more than an hour. I called out her name, got nothing but echoes bouncing off the ridgeline. My radio crackled with static. The mountains blocked signals in these deep hollows. I was on my own until I hiked back to higher ground. Her field notes were scattered everywhere, pages torn from her notebook and spread across maybe 2 miles of forest floor. I gathered what I could find, and the more I read, the more worried I got. Her handwriting started neat and careful, documenting measurements of old cabin foundations, sketching chimney stones and well sites. But the later pages got sloppy, frantic. She'd drawn impossible things, rooms that couldn't fit inside the cabin walls, stairs leading down into the earth, symbols carved in wood that didn't match any Cherokee or settler markings I knew. The last entry I found was just one line, written so hard it tore through the paper. She's still here. She's still alive. I shouldered my pack and headed down the unmarked trail to Bone Valley. Been walking these mountains all my life, but something felt different that day. The woods were too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even my own footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. The trail down to Bone Valley is maybe 3 miles, winding through old-growth timber and rhododendron thickets. About halfway down, I started smelling something wrong. Not rotting exactly, but like sulfur and old flowers mixed together. The smell got stronger the deeper I went. That's when I found Sarah's glasses, sitting on a fallen log like someone had placed them there careful-like. No scratches, no dirt. Clean as the day she bought them. But Sarah was blind as a bat without those glasses. She wouldn't have gone anywhere without them, especially not into the deep woods. I picked them up and looked through the lenses. Everything seemed normal, just a little magnified. But when I lowered them, I could have sworn I saw movement in the trees ahead, like someone in a long dress slipping between the trunks. Called out Sarah's name again. This time, I got an answer. "Come on down, honey," a voice called back. Old woman's voice, thick mountain accent. "Got fresh coffee on and cornbread cooling on the sill." But the voice came from empty air. No one there but me and the silent trees. The trail ended in a hidden hollow about the size of a football field. Bone Valley sat in a natural bowl between steep ridges, with a thin creek running down the middle and steam rising from hot springs near the far end. The fog never lifted here, my grandfather had told me. Something about the way the land lay trapped the mist year-round. The cabin stood right where Sarah's research said it would be, one-room log structure with a stone chimney, probably built around 1860. Should have been nothing but foundation stones and maybe some rotted timbers. Instead, it looked like someone had been keeping it up. Fresh chinking between the logs, new cedar shingles on the roof, smoke drifting from the chimney. That stopped me cold. This place had been abandoned since my great-grandfather's time. No roads led here, no power lines, no way to bring in supplies. But there it was, looking like someone might step out the front door any minute. I circled the cabin, looking for signs of who might be living here. No tire tracks, no trash, no modern equipment anywhere. The only footprints in the soft earth around the building were small, like a woman's, but they looked old, filled with rainwater and starting to sprout weeds. The front door was heavy, hand-hewn oak, fitted with wrought iron hinges that should have rusted away decades ago. I knocked and called out Sarah's name. "She's restin'," came that same old woman's voice from inside. "Come in and sit a spell." I tried the door handle. It turned easy, no lock or latch holding it shut. But when I pushed, the door wouldn't budge. Felt solid as stone. I walked around to the single window and peered. It through glass that was somehow clean and unbroken. The inside of the cabin was bigger than it should have been, way bigger. From outside, the structure was maybe 12 by 16 feet. But looking through that window, I could see a kitchen with a wood stove, a sitting area with handmade furniture, and doorways leading to other rooms that couldn't possibly fit inside those log walls. A woman stood at the stove with her back to me, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. She wore a long gray dress and had silver hair pinned up in an old-fashioned bun. When she turned around, I jerked back from the window so fast I stumbled. Her face was wrong, not ugly exactly, but ancient in a way that made my skin crawl, wrinkled like tree bark, with eyes so dark they looked like holes punched in her skull. When she smiled at me through the glass, her teeth were too sharp, too many, like she'd grown extra ones. "Found your friend," she said, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the window. "Pretty little thing. Real interested in the old ways." "Where is she?" I called back. The woman pointed toward the floor, then made a motion like she was patting down earth. My blood went cold. I ran around to the door and put my shoulder against it, trying to force it open. Nothing. Solid as the mountain itself. I even tried shooting the lock with my .38, but the bullets just flattened against the wood without leaving a mark. That's when I noticed my watch had stopped. Hands frozen at exactly midnight, though it had been running fine all morning. I backed away from the cabin, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I spotted the cemetery. About 50 yards behind the cabin, tucked under some old apple trees, were maybe 20 graves. Most had wooden markers so weathered you couldn't read the names. But a few had proper headstones, and when I got close enough to read them, my hands started shaking. The dates were wrong, way wrong. Martha Hopkins, beloved wife, 1843 to 1923. Samuel Garrett, gone but not forgotten, 1889 to 1955. Lucy May Foster, at rest, 1901 to 1978. These people had lived decades longer than they should have. Mountain folk back then rarely made it past 50. But according to these stones, some had lived over 100 years. At the far end of the cemetery was a fresh grave. No headstone yet, just a wooden cross with Sarah's name carved into it. The earth was dark and newly turned. I started digging with my hands, pulling away clods of soft dirt. About 3 feet down, I hit something solid. Not Sarah, thank God, but a wooden box about the size of a coffin. Inside were personal belongings, wallets, jewelry, eyeglasses, car keys, dozens of items from different time periods, all arranged neat and careful. At the bottom was Sarah's driver's license and her class ring from college. A shadow fell across the open grave. I looked up to see the old woman standing at the edge, looking down at me with those terrible dark eyes. "Been expecting you, James Holloway," she said. "Your granddaddy told me you'd come looking eventually." She knew my name. She knew about my grandfather. And up close, I could see she wasn't quite human anymore. Her skin had a gray-green tint, like something that had been underground too long. When she moved, she didn't make any sound. No footsteps, no rustling of her dress. Even her breathing was silent. "Where's Sarah?" I demanded, climbing out of the grave. "Safe and sound," she said. "All my guests are safe and sound. They stay with me now, keep me company through the long winters. I want to see her." The old woman smiled that awful, sharp-toothed smile. "Course you do. Come inside, have some coffee. We got lots to talk about." This time when she turned toward the cabin, the door swung open on its own. Warm yellow light spilled out, along with smells of fresh bread and coffee. Despite everything my mind was screaming, part of me wanted to follow her inside. The light looked so welcoming after the gray November cold. But I noticed something that made me step back instead. My shadow, cast by the light from the cabin door, was moving independently. While I stood still, it gestured for me to come forward, like it had a mind of its own. That's when I knew for certain I wasn't dealing with anything natural. I backed away from the cabin, but the old woman just laughed. "Can't leave now, honey," she said. "Sun's going down, and these mountains get dangerous at night. Besides, you came looking for answers. I got plenty to share." She was right about the sun. Somehow it had gotten dark while I wasn't paying attention, though my stopped watch still said midnight. The fog was getting thicker too, until I could barely see past the cabin's front porch. "My name's Granny Aldrich," she said, settling into a rocking chair that hadn't been there a minute before. "Been living in this valley since before your granddaddy was born. He used to visit sometimes back when he ran his still up on Bear Creek." That got my attention. My grandfather had indeed run moonshine on Bear Creek, but he'd died when I was 12. How could this woman possibly remember him? "Course, your granddaddy was smart enough not to stay for supper," she continued. "Smart enough to leave offerings. A jar of his best corn whiskey, some fresh tobacco, showed proper respect for the old agreements." "What agreements?" Her rocking chair creaked as she leaned forward. "The ones that keep this valley safe from outside troubles. The ones that keep the old powers fed and happy." I looked around the valley, trying to get my bearings. The fog was so thick now I couldn't see the ridgelines anymore. Even the creek had gone silent. It felt like the whole world had shrunk down to just this cabin, this graveyard, and this impossibly old woman. "You're not human," I said. It wasn't a question. "Haven't been for a long time." "Me," she agreed. "Was once, though. Long time ago, during the war. Union soldiers came through here hunting deserters, burning farms. They caught me helping some Confederate boys hide in the caves up ridge." She stood up from her chair and began walking toward me. With each step, she seemed to change. Her gray dress became more tattered, her silver hair more wild. Her eyes got darker and deeper until they looked like tunnels going straight back into her skull. "They were going to hang me," she continued. "String me up from that old oak by the creek. But I made a bargain with something older than their war, older than their God. Traded my mortality for the power to protect this valley." "What kind of bargain?" "The hungry kind," she said and smiled. "I keep the old things fed, they keep me alive. Fair trade, don't you think?" I tried to back away, but my feet felt like they were stuck in molasses. Looking down, I saw roots growing up through the earth, wrapping around my boots. Not tree roots, something else, something that moved like living things. "Sarah," I called out. "Sarah, where are you?" "Oh, she's close by," Granny Aldrich said. "Want to see her?" She pointed at the cabin window. In the glass reflection, I could see Sarah's face looking back at me. She was mouthing words I couldn't hear, pounding on the inside of the window with her fists. But when I looked at the actual window, instead of the reflection, it was empty. "She's in the mirror world now," the old woman explained. "All my guests end up there eventually. Nice place, real peaceful. They don't age, don't hurt, don't want for nothing. Just keep me company through the long years." I pulled my .38 and aimed it at her chest. "Let her go." Granny Aldrich just laughed. "Bullets won't help you here, boy. This is my valley, my rules. You're thinking like the outside world still matters." She was right. When I pulled the trigger, the gunshots sounded muffled and distant. The bullets passed right through her like she was made of smoke. She didn't even flinch. "But I appreciate the gesture," she said. "Shows spirit. I do like a guest with some fight in them." The roots around my feet were getting thicker, climbing up my legs like living rope. I tried to cut them with my knife, but they just grew back faster. "Why?" I asked. "Why Sarah? Why any of them?" Gets lonely in these mountains, she said, especially when you got forever ahead of you. Used to be, folks would come through regular, hunters, moonshiners, young couples looking for somewhere private, always someone to talk to. But these days, nobody visits the old places anymore, too busy with their cars and their cities. She gestured toward the graveyard. So I started inviting people to stay. Graduate students doing research, hikers who wandered off the main trails, campers who got themselves lost. They come looking for the old stories, and I give them more story than they bargained for. I looked at the headstones again, understanding now why the dates were wrong. These people hadn't lived impossibly long lives. They'd been kept alive impossibly long, trapped here in this valley serving as companions to a creature that should have died over a century ago. Don't look so upset, Granny Aldrich said. It's not a bad life. No sickness, no pain, no worries about the outside world. Just peaceful days and quiet nights, helping me tend the valley. And if I refuse? Her smile got wider, showing more of those sharp teeth. Then you'll stay anyway, just not as willingly. The choice is yours. Be my guest, or be my prisoner. Either way, you're staying. The roots had reached my waist now, binding my arms to my sides. I could feel them starting to drain something from me, not blood, but something deeper. Life force, maybe. Energy. Whatever it was, I was getting weaker by the second. In the cabin window, Sarah's reflection was getting more frantic, pounding harder on the glass. I could see other faces now, too, dozens of them, all pressed against the inside of the window, all trying to warn me about something. That's when I noticed the pattern. Every reflection showed the same thing. They were all pointing at something behind me. I turned my head as far as the roots would let me and saw it. A hand mirror sitting on a tree stump about 10 feet away. Old silver mirror in a carved wooden frame, reflecting the cabin's warm light even though there was no light source behind me. The mirror. That had to be it. The anchor, the source of her power. Break the mirror, break the spell. But I was running out of time. The roots were up to my chest now, and I could barely feel my legs. Whatever life force they were draining was almost gone. That's it, Granny Aldrich said, watching me struggle. Don't fight it. Just let yourself slip away. Wake up tomorrow in a nicer place. That's when I remembered the Coleman fuel in my pack. My grandfather didn't just run moonshine. He was also the best demolition man in 3 counties back during the mine wars. Taught me a few things about making things go boom when I was old enough to keep my mouth shut. The roots had pinned my arms, but my hands were still free. I managed to work the cap off my fuel bottle and splash the contents toward the mirror. Most of it soaked into the ground, but some splattered across the wooden frame. Granny Aldrich realized what I was doing and started moving toward me fast, her form shifting and changing as she came. 1 second she looked like an old mountain woman, the next like something made of twisted branches and rotted leaves. "You don't understand what you're doing, boy," she screamed. "Break that mirror and everything dies. The valley, the trees, all my guests, everyone." I fumbled for my lighter, but the roots were getting tighter, squeezing the breath out of my lungs. My vision was starting to go dark around the edges. In the cabin window, Sarah's reflection was nodding frantically, urging me on. The other faces were nodding too. They wanted me to break it, even if it meant they'd die with the valley. "Please," I gasped, looking at Sarah's face in the glass. "Forgive me." I flicked the lighter. The flame caught the fuel residue immediately, sending blue fire racing across the ground toward the mirror. Granny Aldrich shrieked and lunged for me, but it was too late. The mirror exploded in a burst of silver light and screaming voices. Everything went crazy after that. The cabin started collapsing in on itself, the logs folding inward like a house of cards. The fog swirled faster and faster, forming a whirlpool with the broken mirror at the center. The ground under my feet cracked and heaved. The roots holding me crumbled to dust, and I stumbled toward the cabin as it fell apart. In the shattered window, I could see figures climbing out of the broken glass. Dozens of people from different time periods, all translucent but moving, like they were finally free. Sarah was the last one out. She looked at me once, smiled, and mouthed the words "thank you" before she faded away like morning mist. Granny Aldrich was changing too, but not in a good way. Her human disguise was falling away completely, revealing something made of rotted wood and old bones and dark earth. She was screaming in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "You've killed us all," she wailed. "Broken the compact. The old powers won't forgive this." The valley was collapsing, reality folding in on itself like origami. I ran for the trail, dodging falling trees and chunks of earth that seemed to be falling upward. Behind me, Granny Aldrich was still screaming, but her voice was getting fainter. I made it about halfway up the trail before the world went completely insane. Gravity seemed to change direction. The trees were growing backward into the ground and the sky was the wrong color. I kept climbing, following the trail even when it seemed to be leading through solid rock. Then everything went quiet. Shut it. I woke up at the park boundary, 3 miles from where Bone Valley should have been. My clothes were singed, my hands were burned, and I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there. A highway. Patrol officer found me stumbling along the road, talking nonsense about mirrors and witches. They took me to the hospital, treated me for exposure and minor burns. The doctor said I'd probably hit my head and hallucinated the whole thing. Trauma response, he called it. Happens to people who get lost in the wilderness. But when the search teams went looking for Bone Valley, they couldn't find it. The GPS coordinates led to solid rock face. The old trail markers had vanished. Even the USGS maps showed nothing but national forest land where the valley should have been. Sarah Chen was found 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine about 5 miles from her campsite. Accidental death, they ruled. Must have fallen while hiking alone. They gave me a commendation for trying to find her, medal for bravery above and beyond the call of duty. I never told them about the mirrors. That was 6 months ago. I still work for the Park Service, but I requested a transfer to day shift, desk duty only. No more backcountry patrols, no more overnight camping, no more deep wilderness assignments. Officially, it's because of my traumatic experience and ongoing recovery process. Unofficially, it's because I can't look at mirrors anymore without seeing things that shouldn't be there. At first, it was just glimpses. A shadow moving wrong. A face that looked too old in a reflection that should have been mine. But it's getting worse. Last week I caught my reflection aging rapidly while my physical body stayed the same. Yesterday my mirror showed me standing in a place I'd never been, talking to people I'd never met. Granny Aldrich is still out there, somewhere between the mirror world and reality. She promised to reclaim me when the harvest moon returned, and I can feel her getting stronger as autumn approaches. I've covered every reflective surface in my house. Mirrors, windows, even those bathroom faucets. But you can't avoid all mirrors forever. They're everywhere. Store windows, car windshields, still water in puddles. And in every one, I see her face getting a little clearer, her smile a little sharper. The worst part is the other valleys I've started noticing. Places on the park maps that don't quite match the terrain. Trails that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. I've heard stories from other rangers, hikers who disappear for days and come back with no memory of where they've been. Campsites found perfectly preserved decades after they should have rotted away. The Smoky Mountains are old, older than human memory. And in the deepest hollows, where the fog never lifts and the sunlight barely reaches, the old powers still have their agreements. If you're planning to visit the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, stick to the marked trails. Don't go looking for hidden valleys or forgotten homesteads. And if you find a place that seems too perfect, too preserved, too welcoming after a long day's hike, walk away. Some history refuses to stay buried. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed again. And some bargains made in desperation and sealed in blood echo through generations. My grandfather knew that. He left offerings and showed respect, kept the old agreements even if he didn't fully understand them. But I broke something that was supposed to stay broken, freed something that was supposed to stay bound. Now I'm paying the price. The harvest moon rises in 3 days. When it does, I'll be waiting. Maybe I can make a new bargain, find a way to put things right. Or maybe I'll just disappear like Sarah did, become another cautionary tale for the next generation of rangers. But I wanted someone to know the truth, just in case. If they find this written down somewhere, if something happens to me and the official rep on, orts don't make sense. Remember this. The mountains keep their own laws. Respect them or become part of them. And whatever you do, don't look too closely in the mirrors after dark. Sometimes something looks back.